Hi friends, I just wanted to get on here and talk a little bit about the two genetic counselor assistant positions that I was in for 4 years total. I realized that I started my Instagram account after I had started my second genetic counselor assistant role, and so not many of you got to hear about what my first role was like. And so what I want to do with this video is explain a little bit more about my first position and the second position, and then also sort of compare and contrast the two at the very end of this video. So for the first role, I applied when I was a senior in undergrad, and so I had no working experience. I had some jobs here and there, and I was a research assistant in different labs and stuff, but I didn't have what employers would call years of working experience. And directly from undergrad to this position, and it was actually a research genetic counselor assistant position, and so I got to work on very cool different parts of research. The team was relatively large. We were split into two parts. One is the lab side and the other is the clinical side, and I was on the clinical side of things. And I worked with two other genetic counselors, three geneticists, three genetic counselor assistants, and several other, lab team members. Because we were part of such a huge team, we got to do so many different kinds of research over the 2 years that I was there. The thing is that when I started that position, I got to shadow one of the genetic counselors, return genetic testing results by phone, and then also, because we were doing exome sequencing with these research participants, I got to see the genetic counselors consent these patients to research exome sequencing. So what that looked like is, explaining what the difference is between genome sequencing versus exome sequencing. Of course, what is the difference between a research and a clinical exome, and then also what to expect in a research study. So how often do we plan on contacting them? How long we keep their biospecimens for? And that was a really unique experience, and we got to do other sorts of cool research with this data. So we got to have patients come in and talk with them about different genetic testing results. We also got to talk with research participants about what sort of research genetic testing results were they interested in, how do they plan on using these research results to potentially change their healthcare behaviors, how are they going to talk with their family about these genetic testing results. And so it was a really awesome experience, and not only did I get to work on a team of genetic providers, but it was because it was part of a research institute. I also got to be part of a lot of different other opportunities that was honestly pretty amazing. I got to sit in on a weekly genetic case conference, but I also got to sit on an undiagnosed diseases program conference as well. And if you don't know what undiagnosed diseases program/network is, I plan on making a post about that soon, and when I make that, I will post it in the description below. Other things that were really cool about this position was I also part of an academy where I got to learn a lot about public health, health disparities, health equity, got sort of an introduction to public health in that role. Also, just the culture at that research institute was really to foster the next generation of scientists, and so it was highly encouraged for us to go to any sort of webinar or seminar that we were interested in. And so I got to attend so many different cool talks, both from scientists that work in the institute, but also outside visiting scientists as well, and that was such an amazing experience. My second role, it was a little bit different. So by that point, I had 2 years of working experience, and I was applying for a genetic counselor assistant position in a academic hospital setting. When I was first starting out, they hadn't started their research study yet, so I was actually doing a lot of clinical genetic counselor assistant duties. So I would call these patients, remind them of their upcoming appointments, call them about their cancer family history, order genetic testing for them, help with pre-authorizations for genetic testing. And I worked on a team with 6 or 7 or so genetic counselors, so a pretty large team of genetic counselors, and 2 geneticists, which eventually became a third during my second year. And then I also worked with 1 to 2 genetic counselor assistants, one of which was in a different hospital, but still part of the same hospital system. So she and I interfaced a little bit, but not too much. And because it was during the pandemic, I started out as remote, which was a very interesting experience. Like just the idea of like having all your equipment for working from home shipped to you and getting to know your team through a virtual environment and not through meeting them in person was a really interesting thing. We made it work, and I also got to do genetic counselor shadowing as well through the phone. Actually, at the time we were still setting up video appointments, so all of the shadowing that I got to do was through the telephone. And so essentially how that works is the genetic counselor will call the patient, ask them if it's okay if another person, you know, attends the appointment because they're interested in genetic counseling and becoming a genetic counselor. And so depending on that, the genetic counselor will call me if the patient accepts, and then have me go on the line to listen to the conversation. And I feel like that experience was a lot different than shadowing an in-person appointment, because the patient does know that you're there, but then you're also like on mute, so it's like not as obvious that you're still on the line. And so versus in person, when they can see that you're there, they're trying to gauge your reaction to what they're saying or what the genetic counselor is saying. I think it was a really cool thing that I got to see, or sorry, not see, but like attend telemedicine genetic counseling sessions. And 6 months into the position is when we got to start up the research study. And so that role was a lot different. We were contacting patients, not research participants, letting them know that based on the information that we saw in their medical record, that they may be eligible for doing genetic testing, specifically that they had some significant family history of cancer. And so I would talk with patients about, you know, how this genetic testing worked, what to expect during the genetic testing process, and answer any questions that they had about insurance. And so it was a very different sort of setting than in my first role, where I didn't handle any sort of insurance inquiries, because all of that was handled by the research team. You know, they would do, the patient wouldn't have to pay for the exome sequencing, and so insurance was never really talked about during that. In summary, what the differences are is that first one was in person, then became remote during the pandemic. The second one was 100% remote, and then eventually became hybrid. The first one had a larger team but less genetic counselors. The second one had more genetic counselors. The third difference is that was more involved in the research aspect of genetic counseling in my first role versus the second one, where it was sort of, you know, kind of part of the research process, but I was mostly like trying to help patients clinically. And in the second role, it technically was a research genetic counselor assistant position, but the patients didn't become research participants until they decided they wanted to do a survey asking me about their experiences with our clinic. So all in all, I really enjoyed being a part of the genetic counseling team in those two positions, hoping to do more genetic counseling research in the future. So we'll see where this master's in public health takes me. Let me know in the comments below if you have any questions about any of this, and be sure to like this video if you learned something new. Follow me on Instagram at Jeans Unraveled, and I'll see you all next time. Bye.